Welcome to You Counsel. In our yesterday's lecture, we posed this question, and it was an exploratory question, whether misconduct in the virtual world, could that lead to tort liability in the real world? And we had some preliminary discussion in yesterday's lecture, and we concluded by raising a follow-up question. And that question was whether the harm that is caused by that virtual misconduct or wrongdoing, is that harm real? Because if the harm is real, if the damage is real, then there is a potential possibility that a tort action may be a suitable way to go. So we will explore this reality of the harm in today's lecture, and we begin with our usual disclaimer that this lecture is not legal advice. If you have any specific questions, you should contact a lawyer or a paralegal or the Law Society of Ontario for a referral. So is the harm real? We will compare the real harm in the real world versus the virtual harm. And the example we have is the sexual assault example. So in a real sexual assault that occurs between two individuals, two human beings, there are two sort of components, two impacts, two kinds of damages that may flow from that sexual assault in the real. One kind of damage is really physical harm, and this is the kind of harm that happens to the physical body of the victim, the biological harm that is caused, if we can say that. And the second component is, of course, the mental harm, the mental suffering that is caused to that person. Now, with respect to physical harm, in a real sexual assault situation, the harm could be in any shape or form. It could be as simple as having bruises on one's body to much severe injuries to that person, to the person's body. Now, in cases of virtual sexual assault, that physical harm does not exist. At least it doesn't exist as of today. We talked about the concept, the technology of haptics in our lecture yesterday, which allows our bodies through haptics to feel the impact, physical touch, physical impact of something, and how that technology will develop in the future. It is hard to say that now, but if by virtue of using haptics can a person suffer much more severe physical harm, then that is something that we will find out in the future. But as of today, in cases of virtual sexual assault, the harm is not really physical, but it does have it may has certain physical manifestations. So for example, the person who has suffered virtual sexual assault may have sleep deprivation, nausea, and other sort of physical manifestations, obviously coming through that mental trauma, but there may be physical manifestations that could be considered the physical harm. Now, in cases of mental harm, the scholars who have considered this topic have sort of stated that in terms of the mental harm, the emotional harm, there isn't much difference. I think it's quite the harm in cases of real sexual assault and in cases of virtual sexual assault is pretty similar when it comes to the mental harm. So they kind of suffer the similar emotional trauma. The feelings of harm to one's dignity is quite similar. Feelings of helplessness are quite similar. And often women who have suffered virtual sexual assaults and physical sexual assaults, they have indicated that, for example, in instances of groping, whether it's in virtual world or real world, the feeling of being violated and feeling of helplessness is quite similar. So the academic literature sort of suggests that the mental emotional harm, whether it's sexual or real or in virtual world, is quite similar. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind about the virtual world is that in virtual worlds, when you join a virtual world scenario, you are expected to give up a lot of control to be able to experience the true immersion, right? The participants in the virtual world are expected to suspend their disbelief of the virtual world. So in virtual world environment, when you join in, you are expected to give up a lot of control to that world, to the operators of that world. And so in those scenarios, if your avatar is acting in a way that is your authentic self, then you will feel much more connected to that avatar. And similarly, if the avatar experiences virtual sexual assault in this case, then the impact of that, the mental impact of that, could be significant and not much different than the real world trauma. So on the basis of what we have discussed, I would argue that in cases of virtual misconduct, as far as the mental harm, the mental trauma is concerned, that could be sufficient for a court to find that there is real harm, there's real damages, and because of that real harm or real damages, this could be something that could be pursued in courts as a tort action. Now, another example of this kind of online harm, which has been established for quite some time, is from online bullying. We all know that many young adults who have suffered from online bullying, they have significantly suffered mentally, and in some cases, some of young adults have ended up committing suicide. So there has been a significant impact of online bullying, which is all online, but it causes significant harm to the people who are the targets of that. So the concept is similar. Of course, it is slightly different in the sense that in virtual world, we're experiencing that through the avatars, but the transmission of that harm is conceivable to the real person who is the victim, who is owning that avatar. So if the harm is real and there's potential liability that may flow, who are the parties that could be held potentially liable? And there are two parties that come to our mind quite simply. First one is obviously the provider of that virtual world, and it could be a gaming company. In our example, we took the example of Roblox and another QVR. Those were the two gaming companies, and so those could be considered the defendants in a virtual sexual assault case because they are simply the providers of that virtual world. And remember, if you understand from the previous lecture, this virtual world is all digital. It is computer generated. It is a creation of that company, that organization that has created it. And the person who has committed that virtual sexual assault in our previous example of that 7-year-old girl who had experienced that sexual virtual assault in Roblox, in that case, the assault occurred because the gaming platform had the capacity for the developers to develop these kind of programs who could commit that kind of wrongdoing. So these sort of virtual world platforms are generally imagination platforms, and Roblox sort of markets itself as an imagination platform. It gives children and developers the opportunity to create their own environment in that world, create their own games. And when you give that much of freedom to create their own games, while they can create good experiences, they can also create bad experiences, right? And so it is conceivable that the liability, because of these bad experiences, because of these wrongdoings, it is conceivable, it is foreseeable that the creator of that world could be held liable for that tortious conduct. Now, the second person or persons could be the people whose avatars actually cause that harm, because remember that avatar is functioning on because of the creation of a real human being behind that. At least so far, we are in the world. When we get to the world of artificial intelligence, where avatars itself are creations of artificial intelligence, then that will be a separate debate. But at this stage, these avatars are functioning because of the controls of a human being behind it. So could that human being be held liable? Yes, because that human being may be held liable for the conduct of that particular avatar. And again, in the example of that 7-year-old girl, if her parents had chosen to, let's say, bring a court action against those individuals, then one of the ways they would have done so is to demand from Roblox to disclose the identities of those individuals who had those accounts. And if Roblox would deny it, which it would because of privacy reasons, they could very well go and obtain a court order compelling the gaming company to provide the information of those individuals. So those individuals could be sued as well for their conduct in the virtual world. Okay, so now we come to a stage where we have sort of indicated that damages could be real. And if damages are real, then there's a possibility that you can pursue in court. But that is not the complete tort liability analysis, because if you have watched my lecture on the basic test of tort liability, there are several factors that we have to consider. So what we'll do is that we will consider that in our next lecture, damages is one part, but remember that duty of care is one of the crucial parts of tort analysis, and we have to sort of figure out whether the gaming company or that individual whose avatar caused this harm, do they owe a duty of care to the person who has suffered that harm. So we will do that tort analysis in the next lecture, and stay tuned for that. We'll bring it up shortly, and thank you for watching.